Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of this early childhood nerd. I'm not going to redo that. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee. I was thrown because Carol was acting like she couldn't find something she needed. I'm going to blame
That
her.
was my dog. My dog is snooping at the door.
So with me on this episode, that was Carol Garboden Murray. Hi, Carol.
Hi, everyone.
And Lizz Nolasco. Hi, Liz.
Hello.
And Rixa Evershed. Hi.
Hey, y'all.
So we're trying a fun, maybe fun idea, and it comes from just the work I've been doing as an instructor, and we have to talk about theorists in every class, and every textbook has a section on theorists at the beginning, but it's all the same, like 4 or 5 mostly old white guys. Maria Montessori gets thrown in, so we have at least one woman in there. But so this is coming from me both wanting to find a way to share information about a variety of influences on the field, and to celebrate the women, or the not white men who've contributed to the field and to our work. So I just asked folks, in this case it was Liz and Carol and Rixa, if they'd want to come and talk about a woman that had been sort of influential or that informs their work. And we're going to call it we're going to release them all in May, and we're going to call it the Early Childhood Matriarchy. So here we go.
Love it.
So we didn't talk about who wanted to go first, or if there's anything anybody wants to say before we jump in, just on the general concept of the matriarchy idea. Okay, cool.
Let's roll.
Okay, yay.
Matriarchy. The matriarchy, but I do want to point out that matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy.
Right.
And
yeah, that's been on social media lately. There was a post that was shared by a lot of my kind of adjacent friends, about a matriarchal society not being just suddenly men are powerless and the women are doing everything, and it's not just the opposite. Yeah. In this case, it's just a play on words, Carol.
I love it.
Okay. Hey, Liz, can I ask you to go first?
Sure. So my person was Rhoda Kellogg. And at first I was thinking, we don't talk enough about art and like authentic art and children's real art that's not representative in early childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that was most of what I knew about Rhoda Kellogg until, I don't know, 72 hours ago. and so
yeah,
I do my homework,
yeah.
Time. So she was a badass. She was a suffragist. She was the president of the University of Minnesota Equal Suffrage Club. She was in fact jailed for 5 days for participating in the Watchfire demonstrations in January of 1919. And she wrote a bunch of books, not just the art books that I knew, which are wonderful, but she also wrote a book called Nursery School Guide. Sorry, let me find the full title here. Nursery School Guide, Theory and Practice for Teachers and Parents, which I did not read all of. I skimmed through, and it's contained this lovely gem this was published in 1949. And she wrote, with the birth rate, the divorce rate, and the housing crisis what they are, it is very likely that a permanent public program, meaning early childhood programs for children from age 2, will become nationwide during the next decade.
And when did she write that?
It was published in 1949.
That's not even funny.
I know, right? I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, it certainly has been cyclical and repeatedly ignored. So can I just tell you quick, Liz, that so here's one of the reasons I think this is going to be really fun for me, is that you all sent me who you'd like to talk about, and I had to go and learn about a lot of people. So I'm learning along with anyone else who's listening to this. But I know, Carol, you've talked about Rhoda Kellogg a lot, and then Liz is actually the one who put her on the list. And I was like, because my only My only Rhoda Kellogg information is from a class I took in my associate's degree, where essentially they just gave us these stages of drawing or art and made us go into a childcare center and find kids who were doing each stage and load up a sample of it. And I thought it was annoying. So I'm looking forward to you teaching me more about Rhoda.
Yes, so that is most of my focus, but just in general, she's a badass.
Uh-huh.
She also opened her book, Babies Need Fathers, with the killer line: since most books on how to be a mother are written by men, perhaps it is in order that women should venture some remarks on how to be a father.
I love it.
That's so great.
That's so good.
All right.
Yeah.
So radical.
And what year was
Strong.
that?
Strong matriarchal figure.
Yeah.
I should also note for anyone interested that all of the books that I read of hers are available on archive.org, and you can borrow them for an hour at a time. Some of them you can just download for free because they are public domain now.
Oh, archive.org. I've never heard of that.
Oh, really? It's
Yeah.
a lot of, yeah.
I'm on it. I'm writing it down.
So she wrote, so she was founding director of the Golden Gate Kindergarten Association, which still exists in San Francisco. She had, so her book, The Nursery School Guide, was really interesting to me because she started off talking about the distinction between nursery school and childcare.
Oh,
But
boy.
she then went on to say that, you know, the Golden Gate Childcare or Golden Gate Kindergarten Association does in fact provide the option of up to an 11-hour day because children need care, and it's better for them to be in a place that is stimulating and warm and caring and lovely for them than we're housed and shuffled around and in whatever setting happens to fit.
Mhm.
Obviously paraphrasing heavily here.
Wow.
So she, because at first I sort of got my heckles up between, oh, are we really doing this? But
Yeah.
it was 1949. I guess we hadn't done it too much before. So
We were
she
just
gets a pass.
inventing it. Yeah.
But again, so the work I know her from is in fact from the same class Heather took, presumably, where
Stages of art assignment in probably ECED 103.
ECE 103, yep. And so that was where I knew about her, and that was where I learned. So unlike Heather, I enjoyed the assignments and found great value in
I think you and I had very different attitudes about the associate's degree program, even though it was the same program.
I don't think we graduated that far apart either. I think it was
No.
the very same.
Anyway.
But I mean, she really brought me in because prior to learning about her, a scribble is a scribble, right? It's the thing that a child might or might not even be looking at the paper while they're doing. And I held that same belief that it was just this motor activity that was generally meaningless to the child up until it wasn't. So that is in fact not the case. If you look at the psychology of children's art, she does a really beautiful job. So, I should also say she's known for having an enormous collection of children's art. She has over 500,000 drawings made by children from 2 to 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And you can again access a lot of these online. And there are periodic exhibits. I have seen them in San Francisco, but I know they travel sometimes as well. And
not to make light of this, but like when I think of 500,000 artifacts, I think of my treasure chest from when my kids were growing up, full of all of their art. And they're like, Mom, there's only a mark on here. Why do you keep it? And I'm like, because you made that mark when it was this or that.
A mark is never just a mark.
Never. Exactly. Well, it's funny you said it because I saw the 500,000 and I went, 500,000 for children from 2 to 8. That took what, maybe 2 months? I mean, archiving them obviously took a while, but
yeah.
And she traveled a lot too, right? She got marks from all over the world.
Yes. In the psychology book, she has some incredible photographs of a child in, I believe it's Nepal, I didn't write it down, who had never had a crayon and paper before, but he had been drawing with sticks and with his fingers in dirt and snow. And so he just promptly transferred that skill onto paper with a crayon, which was just kind of incredible to read about and just how instinctual it is. And she goes on to talk about the way the forms that children draw are heavily associated with religious symbols. And her argument is it's not that these children are suddenly spontaneously religious so much as these are just the basis of humanity. These shapes are universal.
Okay.
These are, you know, images of sun figures in ancient, sorry, real bad pregnant brain right now, at ancient sites, sites.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't necessarily mean that people were worshiping suns. It means that people knew how to draw mandala figures.
Yeah. So can we just quickly, in case this is someone's first introduction to Rhoda Kellogg, what was her art thing? Like, what was her beyond like a scribble is never just a scribble? How can we sum up
Yeah.
what her thoughts were about how children develop that drawing or writing?
Right. So in the same way, it's, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing too badly. Please jump in and correct me if I'm off here. It's kind of a stage theory, right? There are specific stages and figures that children draw and will draw, and they are universal. And you can see them in all sorts of different manners.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had a catalog of, oh, it was so many, and I did not write down how many, but many, many, many different figures, from lines, circles,
Mm-hmm.
to the mandala, the humanoids. And she also cautioned people in general, parents, teachers, to really refrain from labeling them until the child labeled them. She was a big proponent of letting what was on the paper be what was on the paper without having to represent something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that was cool to me. You know, I laughed about the assignment, and then it just occurred to me, if I'm going to use these in future classes, I shouldn't have made fun of an assignment I did in the same class they're probably taking. But it was really interesting, and I had never thought about that there might be kind of a predictable procession, that's not the word I want, but development of how what marks they're making and how it sort of evolves. And that part's really interesting. It's like when I learned about the stages of block play, suddenly this meaningless emptying and filling of blocks had meaning, because I realized, oh, this is something they have to do to know the materials, and then they can start doing, you know, the lines and the enclosures and the building up. And I thought the same thing when I came across Rhoda Kellogg. I just love having my mind blown by the competence of children.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And she really she believed that all humans have an innate sort of desire to make a mark, and a sense of, what does she call it? Like an aesthetic sense, right? Like she would just like take like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scribbles and be like, don't you see the pattern in these scribbles? And you know, you look at them and think, no. And she would show how the child moved from like the randomness to organizing space. And even like how she could see in their scribbles that they had a desire for balance, or that the beginning of the circles, even though they couldn't stop, they would do the circular, 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 or enclosing, or putting points in all four corners. So even the kids who don't do like the exact stages, like the little humanoid and this mandala and all that, she could still show how they used that page to seek order and to and progression, right? From the scribbling to the horizontal to the vertical to the circle, to combining those shapes to design. To design and pattern and find pleasure. Is like every child is an artist.
Yes, and I love the way her books cataloged the incomplete designs as well. And they were, after she explained, well, this is incomplete, this is how I know, you can go, oh, okay, yeah, I see how that's not actually the full impact. I thought it was particularly interesting when she was writing about the humanoids without legs.
Yeah. What describe the humanoid without legs?
So that was kind of like an ovally shape with, and she also was very clear in the book that she only used anatomical terms because there weren't better terms that fit, but she persistent that, you know, don't label children's drawings, but
Mhm.
she did use arms and legs, and was it head features? I think
Like
one
a
was
head
called
knot.
hats.
She points out that little head knot, like this little clump of hair on the top. Like kids
Mhm.
will go through that phase of doing like a little head knot.
Yes, and she has a beautiful catalog of it with circles and squiggles and all sorts of different, but it's that consistent shape above the head.
Mhm.
But she talks about the way their arms, and sometimes the arms are wings because the child makes a box rather than a line. And I was also super surprised by the way she wrote about stick figures, where she set aside a section and said, no child naturally draws a stick figure. That is an adult creation.
Oh yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just
So
thought that was
true.
such a funny, because I remember learning how to draw a stick figure and I went, oh, that was a universal experience. It wasn't just that I didn't know how to draw a stick figure. Everybody learns how to draw a stick figure, but the rest
Yeah.
of the drawing comes organically.
Uh-huh.
And just this idea that there's an elegance, right? Like that a human child knows how to just with a few strokes represent something that we can all identify with. So there's this wholeness and elegance to it, where another psychologist might look at it and say, oh, the kid left off the body or the kid left off the,
Mhm.
ears. She's like, well, no, this is the most elegant, simple way to make that shape given this child's uh sort of it comes from within. They're not looking at humans.
Yeah.
It's this innate ahead, and the little tadpole people, it comes to all the kids.
I think it's so interesting how children are like universally drawn to communicating through mark making, and how the well they can always tell you exactly, like they know what they put on that page. And so I love how she holds that space for like, let the child tell you what this is. Of course every teacher's done that, myself included, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I love your son. Well, that's not a son.
Yeah.
Oh dang it, I
Yeah.
did it again.
Yes.
And so just the we talk a lot about just sitting back and kind of watching children engage in their own learning. And I think that this is the perfect example for that, of just, she must have just sat and watched as they organized their thoughts onto pages, and the observation of the thought process in
Mhm.
and of itself is just so powerful and beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I would have never, I don't know, even in all my years of working with children, if I would have ever noticed that 4-year-olds often go through a phase with leaving off the arms.
Mhm.
And she's not like, she'll say, I don't know why this happens, but there tends to be a short phase where they draw the human, and they seem to be more interested in elongating, so
Mhm.
they'll make two long legs coming out of the head, and maybe those two long legs become like the clothes, or they have
Mhm.
little feet on the bottom of it. But something about this phase where they're more focused on elongating the figure causes them to leave off the arms.
Mhm.
And I don't think I would have ever noticed that without her pointing out that, and then like seeing, oh, he's in that phase where
Mhm.
he's focused on elongating the legs and there's no arms. I might be like, where are the arms?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've all, we're like, well, this is a wonderful thing you're doing. Very Kellogg inspired.
Right.
Or but then we're like, oh, but accreditation or licensing or whatever says I have to write down the story of this drawing. So tell me your story. And that's
Or
actually
worse, but wait, here's Matt Man. So here's how you actually make a person.
yes,
Right.
Matt Man, yes. Yeah. What else, Liz? Anything else about Rhoda? You didn't really talk about how it really affects what you do with children or has affected what you do with children.
Yes. I mean, I think from the beginning, I think why I enjoyed the assignment so much was because I did learn so much about like keeping quiet. I think not, never drawing next to children or alongside children was such a huge takeaway for me.
Yeah.
And I had some teachers who really did not like me as a director because
Same,
wasn't
babe.
mean about it, but I did bring it up in conversation,
Uh-huh.
why you let children draw and go through their own stages of drawing and really discover it. And I think there were some folks who did not believe me or Rhoda very much on that one.
Isn't it weird that there are people who don't think that's cool? Like, it's weird to me that there are people who are like, yeah, I reject that wholly, and I'm just going to keep doing my thing. I don't understand it.
Right. At the same time, I do think there's a place for teaching children how to use materials, but it's also very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to conceptualize using materials versus how to create an image.
Yeah.
But I did not read about her talking about introducing specific materials. I think she was very focused on what the children did with what was already present.
She had a lot of good stuff about easels, right? Have you seen, like, she had all the drawings, how to make easels, and how to recipes for finger paint, right? She did a lot with finger painting on the surfaces and on the tables without chairs, when to move the chairs away, when to let kids stand, how tall the tables should be, how tall the easels should be. So she did a lot around, like, furniture and giving kids real materials.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So Carol shared with me a chapter from William Crane's book, Reclaiming Childhood, where he talks a little bit about Kellogg. And I haven't read the whole thing, but what did stand out to me in the bit that I did read was talking about those humanoids or the tadpole people, where it gets elongated, and how some people would look at that and say, that shows us a deficit, that shows us what they don't know how to draw yet. And instead of saying, this shows me growth, this shows me cognitive development, really, right? This shows me the child's competence. And for me, that's what I think is so much fun about all this kind of theory and philosophy stuff, is that it gives us a lens to slow down and watch through.
And what is it with everybody with this deficit mind thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let them be. Just let them do.
Yeah. That's a whole other episode. I'm writing it down, Rixa.
Sorry, Carol, you and I jumped in at the same time.
No, sometimes because I came from that background of the emergent development, and the nursery school materials, the easel and the blocks, all that. Sometimes I have a lot of questions about what we see in the way Americans interpret the Reggio approach with kids looking at things and drawing things. And I've seen it even where children as young as 2 will be given a still life or something like that. And the teachers will say, oh, we're not, like, teaching them to draw, but
we're inspiring them.
But they're trying to get the child to look closely. And I'm curious. Like, I don't know how I feel about it, because I have seen all these images and shapes and lines and color, and I've seen it all emerge from the child that's not looking, it's coming from within. And there seems to be a sort of a different style, I guess, from what I see, how I see the kids drawing at my school and how I see the kids drawing at a very sort of strict Reggio school, which I think those drawings are beautiful. But I don't usually have kids looking closely at things until they're 4 or 5. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, and I don't know what the developmentalists would say about it.
It's such an interesting idea, the aesthetic that comes from within versus the, I don't want to say imposed aesthetic, but I think that's kind of what it is. Right? That realism maybe before they're strictly ready for it.
Yeah. And if the idea is we want children to slow down and look closely and notice deeply, I would suggest maybe the adults should be doing those things.
What?
Like, it's fine if you want to have it there. And I don't know the details of how that works in Reggio and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it seems like another example of I'm asking a child to do something that I don't do myself. So before I get in trouble with all the Reggio inspired listeners, I better just stop there.
Well, I think that they've made it very clear that Reggio Emilia teaching happens in Reggio Emilia, Italy.
Yes.
And that what we do here is the American interpretation of that. And I think my sense is that most of us take elements from a lot of different approaches and styles, and kind of in the kind of the spirit of what the child is doing in the drawing, we're doing what intrinsically feels nice or right to us. And I think one of the things that has taken me a long time to kind of figure out is trusting what I feel is right, because I was telling a story at work the other day about getting written up for letting a child go up the slide, right? But I was like always that teacher who was like, there's nobody else around unless you guys can go up the slide, right?
Go.
Right. And so, I mean, I do see value in a lot of the practices that they do there. And I don't, like Carol, I don't know that some of those things would fit for me based on the age or, you know, whatever it is. So,
I would love to see like how they interpret, like in Reggio, how they see Rhoda's collections, and I would love to see the drawings of 2s and 3s and 4s, because you don't always see the scribbles, right? Well, what we get to see is like the finished product or the project. I'd love to see that, because I have a feeling that it's similar to what we're talking about.
The process. How did they get from the original
letting
mark
that
to
emergent, right?
Right. They didn't just sit down and make that a beautiful drawing the first time they sat down to draw.
They have such a deep, long relationship with the materials, right? Longer and deeper probably than children get in our schools with clay. And
to be able to have that relationship with their teachers too. I mean, unless there is such a strong, respectful foundation, I don't think most children would follow a teacher's instructions to, you know, look and draw
Sure.
until you've got that connection and mutual respect happening.
That consideration of them as our equals.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so can we be done with Rhoda, or do you have anything else you're burning to say, Liz?
I think that was most of it. I just love the idea of thinking more deeply about children's authentic art and finding the value that it's easy culturally to overlook.
And I'm so glad that you brought her to this project, because now I'm gonna go get over my stages of art annoyance and learn more about her. I'm gonna dig deeper in. I'm gonna go next, just because I know we want to keep Carol and Rixa together, because their two folks blend in pretty well. But so my person for this episode is Janet Gonzalez Mena, who did a lot of work and writing about infants and toddlers. And I was in the same building as her once, but I didn't meet her in person, and I'm sad about that. But for this, I dug out my very old edition of her book. It even has my old name on it. So she has this book, Infants, Toddlers, and Caregivers, and it's several editions past this one. So I probably got this in the mid-90s, and I was working with young children, but didn't really know it was a thing to be studied. And I don't even know how I found this. It was before the internet. I found some like catalog that I could order books about working with children. And I got this, and I can vividly remember when my 6 2-year-olds were sleeping, I would be sitting at the little tiny 2-year-old table and reading from this book and being completely changed by it. So I was trying to find, like, there's no way to just find one thing that summarizes it, but so I'm going to just read this quote. It isn't the clever little toys that you provide or the activities that you do with children that makes a difference. It's the day-to-day living, the relationships, the experiencing, the diaperings, the feedings, the toilet training, and the playing that contribute to the intellectual development. And people have heard me tell this story, but not long before I found this book, I was really so proud of how fast I changed diapers and could just move kids through the assembly line. And thinking about it now, I can still pretty vividly remember that and that sort of lack of humanity in the process. And so first I discovered Magda Gerber and learned to slow down during routine times, but then Janet Gonzalez Mena made it sort of got that part of me that still felt like I needed to still be a teacher, quote unquote, and that meant I needed to be in charge and be leading things and have plans. And this just instinctively felt right as soon as I came across this. She's got, the principles of like 10 principles of working with infants and toddlers. And it was so humanizing that it was still early in my career, but it just changed things completely. It was just like turning off another road and knowing I was going to the right place.
It's so validating when you have that experience where you're just like, I don't know, for me, thinking I would maybe be a kindergarten teacher, and like going, oh, I'm so interested in the fours, and oh, I'm so interested in the threes, and now the twos, now the ones, and then you're like, oh, this whole human development fascination. Like, I love the way she gives such respect.
Yes. Yeah, and to that age group that is at the time for sure, and still sometimes now, people are like, well, they don't really start learning until they're about 3. That's when we start the learning. Or so many parents who have said, we'll bring them here until they're, 2, 2.5. And then, since they'll be able to learn stuff, then we'll take them to preschool, that kind of thing. So it was just like not only new for me, but I didn't see anything like that anywhere else. Once I was aware of it, I wasn't seeing it anywhere, which kind of probably was the drive that I had to then start going and doing conferences and stuff. Like I was so young and looked even younger, and I had written a letter to the cooperative extension that did a childcare provider conference every year in Nebraska, where I lived, in the part of Nebraska where I lived. And I remember writing a letter to them and saying, why don't you ever have anything about infants and toddlers? And they wrote a letter back and they were like, because we don't know anybody. Would you come do some workshops about infants and toddlers?
Wow.
So I did. And then like my brother-in-law at the time worked at a printing company, and he made up all these very fancy, not really very fancy, it's essentially just a trifold photocopy on colored paper, like flyers of the topics I'd come do. And I just mailed it and drove around Nebraska doing that for free. But I think it started with knowing how much Janet Gonzalez Mena had blown my mind and changed my mindset and sort of validated an instinct that I had to how I wanted to be doing things. It just seems like a really long time ago.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I came into the field, I was an Army spouse, and so I started working at the child development centers and in the preschool rooms, because that was the easier age, right?
Yeah.
and God, like you, I didn't know anything. And then I got put in an infant room with an absolutely gifted infant teacher. And I stayed with infants and toddlers for the rest of my career. I will argue with anybody about the capability of 1-year-olds, because that was really my sweet spot, is from 12 to 24 months, and watching their ability to do all the things, like solve problems and collaborate and communicate and find joy and explore and all the things, right? And so when I hear that, it sort of sets my teeth on edge that, oh, we'll just take him here. And I'm like legitimately, if infant and toddler teachers do their job well, and really create spaces for these little tiny humans to learn in, the rest of their life is influenced by that. We would greatly reduced the need for remediation once we got into kindergarten and above. And so I just have this picture in my head. I had these old stumps in my classroom, as most people do, right?
Well, sure you do.
And I would put magnetiles, like just like 4 or 5 magnetiles on top of each of the stumps, and I can just picture in my head this little one who would come over, and of course there would be light shining in, so the magnetiles have that glowy feel to them, and she would just work in that space for like a long time. I'm talking like 15-20 minutes sometimes, where she would just
but they have such a short attention span.
Oh, for sure, and she might go off and grab, other materials to add in, or, and she may or may not leave that space until somebody else joins her, or, bumps her, because we're not walking real well at that point, And so I love so much, I mean, Magda Gerber, obviously, but that there's these practitioners out there that wrote down these ideas that eventually got to people like you. Yeah. And the rest of us on this call, because I think we're all like,
I think that could be said for all of us. I as an instructor now, and well, I mean, the program chair, so I'm influencing all of the classes. One of my priorities coming in was to look at how infants and toddlers were being presented or ignored or, erased in the curriculum, and found that the only infant toddler specific classes that were in our degree track were electives. So nobody really had to do any infant toddler stuff. So I tell all of my classes now, we've got specific time frames for infant and toddler stuff, whatever the topic is. And I tell them, you don't know. You may be sitting in this classroom thinking, I'm never going to work with infants and toddlers. I'm going to be a preschool teacher. But when you get into a center, you go where the need is. Like, as a director, I've sat through so many interviews for toddler teachers and have them say things like, okay, but when there's room, could I move to preschool? Could I start in the toddlers and move? I've had one person that came and said, yes, I love toddlers. I want to work with toddlers. Now, those teachers mostly love it when they get in there, but I don't think there's enough teacher prep specific to infants and toddlers to talk about how the learning is happening, but it's different. It takes a different level of understanding. And I feel like that's really the path that Janet Gonzalez Mena set me on.
Yeah, that it is a special, right? A special stage, and and sort of legitimizing that beginning of life, and the people who work with the children at the beginning of life, that it's not watered down preschool,
right?
That it's it's great. It must be fun also with the work you're doing with the schemas too, right? Because
schemas also add a whole new level of toddler
in
understanding.
the toddler world.
Yes, definitely.
I always think of her with Ron Lally too, because they're out there on the West Coast, and what is it? The
West Ed.
Ed, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're not talking about boys in this episode.
No, this is Janet.
We're not.
We can do Ron Lally in another episode.
I think she brought a lot of dignity to the family too, and seeing the child within the family, and
yep, she's got textbooks about that too.
Way back, breaking open these ways we talked about multicultural education.
That's what I was going to say. And I know we don't really talk about multicultural anymore. We want to be more talking about diversity and inclusion and equity and those kinds of things, because there's a nuance in there, right?
She was ahead of her time.
She was ahead of her time. She was using that word multiculturalism, but it wasn't like the touristy, tokeny kind of practice that I had been familiar with. It was very much, we should understand family culture, and we should include that in our decision making and our relationship building, and what we provide in our space should all be based on as true a knowledge as we can get about the family's culture and the social context. that they're coming to us from, and that was pretty amazing.
And she understood the nuance because the intimacy of your work when you're holding babies and toddlers,
Mm-hmm.
the cultural piece is usually around care, right?
Yeah.
It's around
Yes.
how we eat, what we eat,
Mm-hmm.
how we
Yeah.
hold,
Sleeping practices.
it's so intimate to the family.
Mhm.
So how do we form those true trusting relationships while
Mhm.
really perhaps doing things a little different in group care, but trying to find compromises where the
Yeah.
family feels respected?
Yeah, that was harder for me
Mhm.
than discovering just her infant toddler stuff. The
Yeah.
diversity stuff was a little harder for me because
Mhm.
sometimes I would be like, is she saying that she thinks spanking is okay if that's
I
what the
know, I
family
know.
does? And I'm like, I don't know.
Is it okay to put
Overall,
Pepsi in the bottle?
yeah, yes, exactly. But overall, it's very yeah, she was absolutely ahead of her time in that area, and still really important for me to have come across, even though it was harder than just buying everything she wrote about infants and toddlers.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Are we done with Janet? Okay, I'm done. If you guys are, yeah. Okay, so Carol, Rixa, do you guys want to fight about who goes next?
Not really. Carol can go. No desire.
No, I knew that. I was just teasing. All right, Carol, you wanted to talk about.
I want to talk about Carol Gilligan. And I was curious, Heather, if do you ever find her in your text?
I do not. I had not heard of her until was it 2 years ago that feminist ethics and care collection came out that you and I both were really excited about.
Yeah.
That's the first time
Yeah.
I read about Carol
Yeah.
Gilligan. And
Yeah.
I left that book in the other room, so
Well, yeah, I just like to talk about her because, she's amazing and she's 88 years old. She's born in 1936, and I just want to see her in the textbooks.
yeah.
And she was at Harvard working alongside all the other people we always hear about, like Kohlberg and Erickson,
Yeah.
and they were working off the legend of, Piaget.
Yeah.
But so we have all these words and all these people and all these theories and stages, but Carol was right there.
Yeah.
She was a student of Kohlberg's, and they were in the psychology department. So she was questioning the stages of moral development that he had developed. And
Is it Lawrence Kohlberg? Is that his name?
Yes, Lawrence
In case no one
Kohlberg.
knows that. Yeah.
So, the thing that happened was that girls and women were scoring lower than men and boys. So
According to Kohlberg's stages. Yeah. Okay.
So the findings being that, we start out with a very basic morality, like, punishment and reward is all that we have to motivate us. But as we go through life, we develop, social norms, law and order, we learn about justice, and then we develop more internal ethics, right? About what is right and wrong, what is just and good. And in his scale, the girls and women were scoring lower. And so she was.
So we thought they aren't as moral as men. Is that what
Right.
was
They
happening?
aren't as moral, right? They aren't as capable of that sort of complex moral thinking. Because the way women answer these questions do not fit into this scale. It's like women would talk about, well, I'm not so sure what I would do in that situation because I'm thinking about how it would affect my children and how they would view me. Or if I made a wrong choice and I was put in prison, then, how would it affect my mother? So there were nuances to the way women made decisions, and it was all tied up in their relationships. So they weren't in areas of justice and those sort of moral dilemmas that were posed as questions. The women were scoring lower. So she just kind of brought up this idea that, maybe the scale, maybe it's not about scoring women within the scale. Maybe it's about questioning the scale itself, because all the research was done on boys and men, right? Women weren't a part of it. And it's so interesting because when you start reading about all this, there's all sorts of ways that psychologists and philosophers question and challenge Carol Gilligan. But it seems like everyone that is questioning and challenging her often forgets to go to that central beginning point, which is women and girls were left out of all the research.
Yeah.
So there's this like thing that I don't think is very doable, that half of humanity can be left out of the, the scales and the way we conceptualize development.
Yeah. I did like just print out, sorry, I've got cat hair on my tongue. Hello, listeners. I did just print out, so I printed off just like a short summary of her theory. And it ends with a section called Carol Gilligan's Theory Today. It includes some conversation earlier about men prioritizing an ethics of justice, where morality is centered on abstract principles and rules that can be equal to everyone, while women prioritize an ethics of care, where morality is centered on interpersonal relationships and moral judgment is based on the context of the issue. So, but I wanted to get to this ending, where we are today with it, because the binary bothers me, right? It's not just men and women, but
right.
it was a long time ago that she was doing her work. But this said that it's now widely acknowledged that there are two moral orientations, just as she proposed. Both genders develop both orientations. Studies show that men tend to emphasize justice and women tend to emphasize care. But research continues to say that there are these two different orientations. So it's that basic point of,
I think
go ahead.
No, exactly. I think she's been saying that from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because she keeps saying, I wrote a book called In a Different Voice, Not in a Woman's Voice.
Yeah.
I have the quote here. I called my book In a Different Voice, Not in a Woman's Voice. What's clear all these years later, through work on infants and neuroscience, is that the different voice, the voice of care ethics, is a human voice. And what it differs from is a patriarchal voice, not a male voice. So, without her, this was the beginning of the whole discussion about care ethics. And from the very beginning, she was struggling with the language, feeling impoverished, because she knew that as soon as she was called a feminist, ethicist, as soon as we talked about care ethics, it was, about humanity. And when we talk about the way we make decisions and the way we live our lives, and the women's voice is part of that conversation, the men also have permission to talk about the relationships, because they have been deprived of care. They have been deprived of being able to claim that part of their humanity. So I do think she was saying that from the very start.
Yeah.
And I just think that, it was in the 70s that she first wrote the paper, and in the 80s, early 80s, the book came out in a different voice. And, care ethics didn't exist before that. Once that was released, then care ethics became a field of study. And then Nell Nodding's book was published, Sarah Ruddick, and all this, evolved into what is now care ethics, but it is relatively new.
Go ahead.
So yes, that I think it's exciting that it is a new field, relatively new, and that I think as early childhood educators, it really helps us define our unique identity, because relationships and care are so central to being early childhood educators. So I just keep hoping that she will be included in the
Yeah.
textbooks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is the one of the beauties of your book, your Illuminating Care book, is that you're bringing it to an audience that maybe wouldn't necessarily come across care ethics in their textbook. Like I use your book as a textbook, so if Carol's in there, then my students are getting getting some Carol Gilligan. But I think I mean that's why it felt like such a revolution when your book came out. It was like, this is a whole different way of thinking about something that's really getting shoved out of the conversation, and some practices. And so it's easy to see how Carol Gilligan's work has impacted you and the things you do because you wrote about it.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Rixa, who do you have?
I have Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she is not an early childhood person, just to start off, but one of the things that she is somebody who cares deeply about humanity. And so I think to give a little bit, I grew up in Colorado in the mountains. My parents' home backed up on national forest. I was a true free range child. My mom was like, you just need to be able to hear me. And so I have just this deep innate love for being outdoors, for the conservation of our natural spaces, for caring about our earth and preserving what we have for future generations. And that's, I mean, those are like the high level talking points. But I think the thing that really resonated with me about Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, was I had read it summer of 2020. We all know what the world was like then. I did an outdoor program with 4 and 5 year olds, half day, 4 hours, just outside on 27 acres with a salmon bearing stream that ran through it with old growth cedar and Douglas firs, wide open grassy spaces. And this was pre-reading Braiding Sweetgrass. And I just noticed in my time with these children outside that the further into the summer we got, one, they became much more in tune with nature and the earth itself. They were really cognizant of, like, we had a rainstorm, the creek has moved a little bit. The lampreys that were in that pool have moved down. I wonder how that happened. So they really became caring of things like the salmon fry and the goat from the neighborhood farm that they would have to go visit every day. And we watched the entire cycle for blueberry or blackberries happen, from leafing out to buds to small tiny fruit, all the way up to when we had blackberry juice dripping down our chins. And so by the end of the summer, they were so confident in their ability to be outside, and they were so cognizant, I think, so cognizant of, like, this is a space we need to take care of because we love it. And I read Braiding Sweetgrass probably a year after that, but all of a sudden I realized that if given the opportunity, children just have this natural connection to the outdoor world. And I started really listening to Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's Potawatomi. She is Native American. She went to forestry school. It was a forestry program, but she was there to study botany, long before a lot of women were going into that field. And she tells a story about how when she got there, her advisor is like, well, why did you choose botany? And she said, because I want to learn why asters and goldenrod grow together. And the advisor was like, that's not science. If you want to study like beauty and art and all those things, you need to go to art school, right?
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, I mean, we're talking about women who are ahead of their time, right? And I think that's been a sort of a common theme tonight. And I truly think she was, because one of the things that was really important to her was that she could explain why sweetgrass was better for basket weaving than other types of grasses, or whether this type of willow did better than that type of willow for that particular craft or art. And when I think about, like, our children are starved for truly wild spaces. They don't have access to them. We've gone overboard in trying to keep them perfectly safe where they never get hurt. And I think I know we're losing that connection and that love for our planet that is what we need to save it, right? And so she is now a professor. She now teaches classes, and in those classes she talks a lot about she takes her college age kiddos out to the natural Walmart, which is a marsh. And she's like, she makes the analogies of, like, you can find this over here and this over here. And they spend a week out there, and they learn all of the cycles of the marsh and all the things that they can eat there and all of the ways that they can care for it. And I just think that, from my perspective, like, we need to be doing that with young children. And I think that she really highlights our need to, or our kind of responsibility, as she talks a lot about responsibility as being a thing of introducing children to the natural world in a way that is about saying, who are you, versus what are you. That connecting the personhood of animals and trees. And I mean, y'all know that trees talk to each other in the mycelium. I mean, it's so cool. And we can teach children that. And she really highlights that for me. And all I could do was take away from this: we need children to understand what a gift economy is. We need them to understand her version of the Thanksgiving address. We need children to understand that we have a responsibility to care for our world. And so I actually teach this book to my staff every year. And we bought the young adult version to work with young children with. It's meant for early teens, adolescents, but guess what? Children are incredibly capable, so they get it.
Yeah. I've had the book sitting here, and I've only read the first chapter of it. And it was very moving. And I kept thinking, one, just the obvious message of what she was writing, that we need to fall back in love with the earth so that we can survive, but also because it's the spiritual sort of process. But of course, my mind is always also going to kind of early childhood stuff in general. And I was just thinking about what a great model. Everything she said about caring in here was so tied to the care ethic, the feminist care ethics. And Carol, I know that's probably why you said you thought these two would go really well together.
Yeah. So many, like, that when I read her, I was so excited because what I learned from Carol Gilligan is that the woman's way of making decisions within a framework of relationship is the failure to separate. So that it's about being connected, right? It's about reciprocity. It's about understanding that we are never independent. It's the recognition of human dependency.
Mhm.
And so everything that she was saying about falling in love with the earth was that kinship, that bond, that failure to separate.
Mhm.
Because when we separate from the earth, then we can use it and abuse it, right? The same as when we separate from each other, we
Mhm.
disregard the other. So yeah, I was so excited when I read it because I felt like it helped me understand care ethics.
Yeah.
And it is like, it's like Carol Gilligan says, it's not that we need to try to figure out how humans, how children develop empathy and connection. It's that we need to figure out how they lose it.
Ah, yeah.
So,
Agreed.
And
yeah.
the other thing that, as I was listening to you, Rixa, one of the things I highlighted in this first chapter was, she says, from the very beginning of the world, the other species were a lifeboat for the people. Now we must be their their lifeboat. And going back to the reciprocity, I just, uh, it's really moving to read this. The other thing I was thinking about was, you mentioned that children don't have just wild spaces to be, which is so sad because my whole childhood was wild spaces.
Mhm.
But even in the spaces they have, so many times adults aren't taking them there. And so there's part of me that as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, how can I incorporate this into my college classes and maybe help the adults who are going to work with children reconnect with the earth. So it's not like, oh, it's too hot outside, or oh, it's raining a little bit, we can't go outside. It's we want to be out, we want to be out there. Um it's so
It,
there's like this middle stage in there.
it's about, to me too, it's about re-embodiment with ourselves too, because we've disconnected so thoroughly from the mental versus physical health, right? Like it's all
Yeah.
connected. And so there's newer research coming out, and I can't quote it very well. I just read some of it the other day about how nature is one of the fundamental forces behind re-embodiment, which we need to become healthy again ourselves.
Mm.
And my favorite quote sort of has something to do with that. I mean, look,
Yeah.
it's well loved.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But she says in here, the recent research has shown that the smell of humus, which is the loam on the bottom of a forest floor, exerts a psychological effect on humans. Breathing in the scent of Mother Earth stimulates the release of the hormone oxytocin, the same chemical that promotes bonding between a mother and a child,
Oh
between
boy.
lovers. Held in loving arms, no wonder we sing in response. Like, when I read that, like, I started crying because
Yeah.
I'm like, she will welcome us if we show care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was just so powerful
Yeah.
to me. Like I make everybody read it. I'm sure people are sick of hearing me say, when you read Braiding
You're probably
Sweetgrass,
why I bought it. Like, this is not something I would typically buy. You must have posted something that
I'm
made
sure.
me buy it. So, but here's where I always end up, or where I often end up when I'm thinking about this. We say children won't, work to save the earth unless they love the earth, and so, all this stuff. But then there are the folks who are like, well, global or climate change is a myth and it's politically driven, and so why do I need to care about this? And it's an example of one of the things that should just be like a human issue, but if it's interpreted in any way as political, it becomes an automatic thumbs down for some people. And it's sad, it's hard.
I think so much of it comes from the divide
Uh-huh.
between what we think of as like, right, the wild and the free and the natural and our built environments. I think there's
Uh-huh.
so much that can be appreciated even in our built up environments, even going into our backyard and seeing what's living there.
Uh-huh.
And there's such a human instinct to see nature as over there,
Oh yeah.
not all around us. When
Mhm.
we moved there are a lot of pigeons in our neighborhood, and a lot of pigeons are taking up residence underneath the eaves on our little porch.
That would
And
make Steve
so-
crazy.
So I started reading up on like how'd all the pigeons get here, and I found this amazing article. Maybe it was in Wired, talking about how people love nature up until it interferes with their desire to have less bird poop on their lawn. And, you know, and it's just that same idea of it's all nature. We're still part of nature, even though we make these sophisticated dwellings and we have the internet and cameras and things. We're still part of it, whether it's out in a little fenced in suburban backyard or out in the desert or in the forest, you know, and finding ways to expand that and just expand our own, expand our empathy, expand our cognitive reach, rather than saying like this is the place that we go to experience nature. It's around us.
And we are part of it, right? Like if the bees go away, the humans go away, right?
Yeah.
Our food chain suddenly becomes very problematic. And, you know, and I frankly, every time I see the stats on coffee plants, I'm like, this could be a real issue because, oh yeah, like the climate change is forcing all of the wild coffee, it's dying because it's not meant to grow in the way that it is now being forced to grow. And so we're sitting here, we're talking on a computer, we're at four corners of the earth, right? Where, or at least the United States,
the country,
right? Right. But I can look out my window. It's pouring, by the way, because I live in the Pacific Northwest. But like, there's a 150-foot Douglas fir right across the street, right? And even to your point, Liz, of like just being in your backyard, but feeling the grass under your feet or smelling the flowers that are there, those are things that connect you sensorially to our world, our planet.
In the same way that holding a baby can, right? You've got that that connection, that touch. I always feel, or often feel like there's a day and it's just nothing is going right, and I just know I need to get barefoot in some grass. Like I just need to stand there barefoot in the grass. It drives some folks crazy because they don't get it, but it's something that I'm getting from nature, I guess. It's
why children should get to run barefoot.
I was just going to say, I was like, there was somewhere I was going with that. And that's exactly it. Like because of our safety concerns or how will we keep track of all the shoes or, whatever it might be, because we've never heard of Rubbermaid tubs before to put all the shoes in. So it's just another, like really important health factor and spiritual factor, and all the other developmental domains can be thrown in there, right? Your vocabulary is going to be different if you're outside and seeing those new things and the cognitive connections that you can make. But we need to get back in touch so we can help children get back in touch, I think.
Go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
Oh, just the other thing I love about her work is that falling in love with the earth and having that relationship with the earth. She goes through such brokenheartedness. And I've also felt like that is, who is it? Terry Tempest Williams is another woman out west who writes about the environment. And they both have this way of being advocates for environmentalists. And it's helped me understand some of my own anger and rage and grief in the field of early childhood education, because there is a lot of, when you have that sense of advocacy and urgency, you love something, the other side of the love often carries that grief. And I think I hear that in her, she's hopeful, but she's very sad.
Yeah.
Well,
just me over here giggling at the idea of Carol Garboden Murray experiencing rage.
That's so funny.
Sorry, Rixa, what were you gonna say?
No, I mean, our lovely Carol, who's always got a smile on her face. But I do, there's
feel
a
your
very real
feelings, Carol.
sense of urgency that we have 6 years before we hit that point where we can't. It's no longer that future date. It's in 6 years.
What's it?
And
Wait, what's in 6 years? What?
if we don't turn around global warming
Oh,
to less than 1.5 degrees of warming globally, then we've hit a point where we can no longer turn back. And I mean, that's one more presidential term, basically. And I just, that it's so soon. It's so soon. And so the rage and the grief, Carol, I feel it with you. I'm sure you can hear it in my throat. I'm just like, I look outside and I'm like, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I lived in Alaska previous to this, and our first winter in Alaska, it got to 70 below, and they said, oh yeah, that's fairly common, in January and February, like it does that every winter, like, but by the time we left, we had the last winter we were there, it only got to like 20 below for that normal 5 to 6 week stretch, maybe 30 to 40 below for a 1 week stretch, but it had warmed that much in the time. And you're, of course, the poles are experiencing a far faster rate of warming than anywhere else. And this isn't meant to be a global warming podcast in any way, shape, or form. But like, if I can convince one person out there to pay attention when they listen to this, then my work here is successful.
Yeah. I think that every podcast about whatever we're talking about, I think if there's just one person who hears this and takes it with them, that the work has been good work.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me a platform to
no, I love
it.
That's, I said I am excited myself to learn from all the people that we're doing this series with, because you've all brought such diverse names to the conversation and diverse ways of thinking. I think, again, when we're talking about those same old theorists in the textbook, it's all essentially just thinking about what we need to do to children, right, to get them to do the things that we think that need to happen. And this broadens the conversation so much to all the different ways we need to think about our work, or can think about our work, or all the different elements outside of what their brain can do are important to consider as we're working with them, which makes thinking about the job so much cooler for me. We do probably need to wrap up. This has been a long one already. So thank you all for bringing those names and those stories and your own stories of how you've been influenced and impacted. I think I really appreciate it. I think I'm probably going to get a lot of emails and comments that say, what was that book? Who was that person? What did they say? So so I may be back in touch with you to remind me of something you talked about, but thank you very much for joining me and being here and caring so much. And thanks everybody for listening. That will be the end of our episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.